welcome back to our first Artist Forge get together that we've had in a while. Everybody's been super busy and we haven't got to be with each other today. So hi and welcome back. You're going to want to be here for today's conversation. We have a fun announcement and also some really interesting stuff to chat about. And to chat with me and with you, as usual, we have the wonderful co-hosts Matt and Becca and Bassam here together today. Hi, everybody. If you're in the comments, well, of course you're in the comments, that's where you are. But if you are in Facebook land or if you are in YouTube, wherever you are joining us today, go ahead and say hi so we can say hi to you. We have missed you too. Hi, Michelle. It's been a while since we've been able to be together. So whoops, double clicking buttons. Super glad to be here today. Let's just real quick hear from everybody since it's been a little while. How's everybody doing? What do you guys have going on? Same question out to the audience.
Busy, 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 busy. Been doing all the things, content creation, going to classes, learning, trying to keep a business going, networking, pulling my hair out, not sleeping, all the things. But yeah, it's been great. Sorry, I missed the past 4 or 5 weeks. I was in a class with Sue Bryce on self-value, and that was really, really great, all about money. So that's where I've been. Whole new attitude towards money. It's fantastic. So good to be back.
I love that. I'm jealous. Somebody needs to come personally adjust my attitude. Like I know better with my attitude. I just don't bother to do anything about it. So if anybody has any they want to come and shocker my noggin, that would be great. Becca, Bassam, how about y'all? How are you guys doing?
Muted, buddy.
Okay.
He's gonna sign his way up. Yeah.
He's got it's noisy outside. So we'll wait till Bassam is back somewhere where he can chat a little bit easier. So Becca, that leaves you. How are you?
I'm okay. Finally feeling sane for the first time in like almost a year. So that's been good. That's been helpful. Yeah.
It's been a journey.
It's been a journey.
So does anybody have any cool projects and stuff that we can chat about before we get into like our full Artist Forge announcement that we want to give folks today? Nothing?
I started
nothing
a blog.
And nobody.
That's my
you
one
started
thing.
A blog?
Ooh, yeah.
That's it. That's all. I started a blog.
I rearranged my office.
Wow. It does look very
nice.
That's the thing.
Oh, there's Bassam.
Yeah, I rearranged my sock drawer.
And a man of your means, that's a sizable drawer.
I have technical issues with my car and my phone. I'm just gonna listen in as much as I can while I'm stuck in traffic for 45 minutes. It's
fair enough.
Bumper to bumper. But nice to see you all. It's been a while.
Ooh, gross.
See you, man.
All right, so I'm going to grab a couple comments really quick. Kelly is with us as well. Hi, Kelly. Sorry, my computer is just deciding to be an enormous bumhole right now. Lindsay's saying parenting is so hard right now. End of school madness, which I'm sure most of us parents can get behind. Attended a fine art gallery class. Fun. Talk about doing a solo show. Yes, do it. All of the house renovations and cool stuff. So I always love getting updates from people because it feels like, I mean, we all know each other mostly, but sometimes being able to hear what people are doing in just their daily lives, it's like, yeah, then it feels like we're closer, you know what I mean? Rather than just always all of the professional stuff. And so I love to hear about everybody's updates.
I've assumed my final main form. Just so you know, I've reached my ultimate form. I now have an unusable toilet in my driveway. So I have assumed the final main form. I am a local. How's that?
I like it.
I took that out of the house this weekend. It sits there. It will sit there until next spring. I guarantee it.
It's art now, Matt.
It
Are
is.
you going
It's
to
going to be a
find
planter.
any like local gifts in it when you do eventually remove it?
I don't plan on any surprise gifts for anybody.
No, I mean in your unusable toilet. I just feel like that's an invitation for bizarre situations.
It's a good thing you live in the middle of the woods. Huh?
glad you're giving me something else to be paranoid about. I didn't have quite the checklist as it is, but
I'm gonna really love
anyway.
it if you happen to go outside one day and there's a bear who is just like, I appreciate this.
The stories are true.
I love it.
So anyway,
Okay.
So didn't mean to derail you, but there was my personal touch. How's that?
No, I like it. I like it. I spent all weekend playing the new Legend of Zelda, which I planned for, like having been waiting for Tears of the Kingdom to come out forever. As soon as it was there, I was like, yeah, I'm not doing anything else with my life now. I took the entire weekend. I must have played like 14 plus hours at least of video games, and it does not hurt my feelings at all. Like I'm kind of proud of myself for doing it. And like for Mother's Day. Well, first, my family knew, like the boys knew, my husband knew it was coming out. He actually bought me a new Switch so I could play it because our being like wonky. And I was like, if I have to play it and it keeps crashing and bad, I'm going to be really sad. And he came home with a new one. I was like, the man loves me. Anyway, so did all of that stuff. And now it's back to the grind today. But having said that, and if you were hanging out with us today, hello again. If you just got here, please say hi in the comments. We love to know that you guys are here so we can say hi to you as well and find out how you're doing. We have a cool announcement to make. So everybody remembers that we had the amazing Dennis Dunbar come in and teach our very first Artist Forge live webinar. And we are continuing that. We are continuing that process with more amazing opportunities for you guys to learn from our incredible community. So Matt, I want to hand it over to you a little bit and have you talk about what you're going to do, because that's our next instructor, friends.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about this. And hold on just a second, because I'm going to ask you guys a question in a second about when you want this. But my goal was, after doing all of this podcasting, after doing Generator, after doing the Artist Forge, doing radio since 1996-ish, I really wanted to put together all this weird knowledge about podcasting into one course. So I did that last week. I got all caffeinated and all focused, and I produced about 90 slides on everything I know about podcasting, from defining your niche to your marketing to all the equipment that you need, recording, video, audio, distribution, monetization, absolutely every part of the process to start a podcast or make yours better, I have covered. So I am really looking forward to offering this to everybody. It's going to be several hours. It's not just kind of like one of these 45-minute webinars where they give you some really high-level stuff and then they pitch you something else. That's not this at all. This is literally everything I know about podcasting in one presentation. So if you have any interest in it at all, please consider attending. And the question that I wanted to put out to you all, we had planned, Nicole, to do this Thursday, but considering that I suck at putting marketing materials together, and I've announced this to nobody except for the people that are on this call, I'm wondering if we can find a better date than this Thursday. But give everybody a chance to find out what's going into it and then ask some questions. Maybe I can cover some things beforehand and really get some folks the information that they need around all of this, whether it's an audio show, a video podcast, a YouTube podcast, whatever it is. I cover it all. I don't know how I did it, but I did it.
Because you have an amazing brain. That's why. So folks who are hanging out with us today, if you are interested, let us know in the comments. And also, you know, like Matt said, we can push this and turn this webinar to wherever we want, which is great. So we want to make it as available to you guys as possible. And while we're waiting for folks to let us know what generally tends to work for them, as most of our forgers know, we tend to wait until kind of Thursday or so evenings, like after everybody's off work and stuff. But we're always open to switching stuff around if things are going to work better for people. So while we're waiting for folks to answer that, Matt, I just want to ask you this question and maybe have you explain a little bit to people. Sure. Why podcasting? And why is that something artists really should be thinking about, especially now? And like, as Becca knows, like just starting this blog and people who've been writing on the internet for a while, of course, like with the advent of AI, all of us are feeling the pressure to be more personally in contact with people, more honest, more human, like all of those things that AI cannot do, right? And we're looking for ways to kind of do some of those things. So like right now with artists who are having to cultivate communities and personal connections in order to sell their art, why is podcasting such an important consideration?
So if you think about it, right, podcasting, this would have been a great course to give about 6 years ago, right? Before podcasts really became a big thing. But I'm here now, so that's all that matters. For artists specifically, we talk about marketing and networking in such a way that it's this big nebulous thing. We should just be marketing, right? And very few people, especially artists, have a good marketing plan. So when you say marketing plan, there's typically 5 pillars. There's brand marketing, there's content marketing, there's social media, there's email marketing, and then there's like SEO, pay-per-click, website stuff. Those 5 pillars, the great thing about podcasting is you can cover all of those things with one podcast. You can be talking about your brand messaging. You can be talking about your products or your content. You can send it out in email form and promote it that way. You can do snippets on social media. It helps with your blog if you have video in there and or audio. So podcasting is really a great method. If you don't know how to market, you know how to speak. And having a microphone in front of you and a video camera, you don't even need a video camera, but being able to talk about your product, your brand, whatever it might be, is a no-brainer nowadays as podcasts are being consumed. There's a stat, let me see if I can find it. It's more than 62% of the US population, 205 million people have listened to a podcast. Don't ask the older generation in my town if they have, because they haven't. But the fact of the matter is, this is growing by leaps and bounds. They say by 2024, it'll be something like a $4 billion business. So if you're thinking it's too late to start your own, you're not going to be Joe Rogan. No, you're not going to be Joe Rogan today. But what you can do is start marketing yourself a little bit differently. And this is the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I just posted as well something from demandsage.com that says, according to market figures, the worldwide podcasting market is worth 23.5 billion, and that expected growth rate, compound growth rate of almost 30%. So that is huge. And if we just think about how often we spend time in these liminal spaces between like home, work, commuting time, also a lot of folks when they're doing chores or other things around the house, we tend to default to something like music or podcast, or I said plural, I don't know why, but music and podcasts and things where we can learn and feel like we're kind of around other people, even though we may be alone. And we're as lonely now as we've ever been in human history. And sometimes just being able to break some of that loneliness with the sound of a friendly voice can really matter. And we may, as many of us here are visual artists, we really may overlook the fact that just hearing somebody else's voice and connecting to people that way can be so powerful.
Right. And it was, it's one of these things that, a lot of us are here because Clubhouse brought us together, right? And we've really been producing this content for a long time. And so we get a little bit jaded when we know that we're getting a lot of people joining us. Well, people think you need thousands and thousands of downloads or listeners to be a successful podcast. You really don't. The top 50% of podcasts have 30 downloads in the first 7 days. The top 25% have 90 in the first 7 days. That's not a lot of people, right? As you start to grow, if you're in the top 25%, the top 10%, where you start to get into 300 downloads in the first week, If you're at that point, you're at a pretty high level. Most folks will record 1 or 2 episodes and then quit. The people that continue, the consistency, are the ones that are going to reap big benefits. It's kind of like starting a Google ad or a Facebook ad, right? You put it out there, you don't have $1 million the next day. You have to let them run for a while. Same thing with podcasting.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes, I mean, you're right. Sometimes folks, we can feel like when we put our work out there and we have, kind of minimal views or minimal downloads or whatever, it can feel frustrating. But if you just think about, even if your conversion rate is 10% and you had 90 downloads in that week, like if your conversion rate is 10% from there, imagine what would be the difference to your business if you had 10 more sales a week, 20 more sales a week, 30 more sales a week. Like all of a sudden that starts to make a real difference, especially when you have that personal connection with your audience. So my husband yesterday looks at me, and he's a pretty fit guy, and having been in the military, he's been fit pretty much his whole life. And he looked at me and he goes, "I think I want to download like a workout regimen from this guy." It's like, it kind of took me off guard a little bit, because he knows a lot about how to stay fit and how to set up programs for himself to target specific muscle groups, all those kinds of things. And I was like, what makes you want to do that? Like, why is this special enough that you want to download it? And he goes, "I really like his content and I want to support him." Mm-hmm. And I was like, cool, I'm behind that. Like, I get that as not only a content creator, but also somebody I have lots of people I love that I follow. Sometimes I will just go and buy their stuff because I like what they do and I want them to be able to keep doing it. So I think that's something that we can't take for granted either once we start building those personal connections.
Yeah. So, we talk on here a lot about authenticity and about having your own voice. And this is no better way that I've found, right? I've been doing this a long time, and I realize that doing anything with audio, doing anything with video, people connect with you in a completely different way. And you can have the best copy on your website or the best social posts, but you are not going to get across your personality, your voice, your feelings, the context in your words, unless people can hear it. And there is no, in my opinion, no more believable, no more influential sort of marketing that you can do than putting yourself in front of somebody. And being able to do this, how many folks know who we are? We don't know who they are, right? They know about our businesses. We don't necessarily know who they are. And it always surprises me just how much reach our little things can really get. So it is not a platform or a marketing method that is obsolete anymore. It is only continuing to grow. Get into it now, right?
Agree. I'm going to grab a question from Lindsay really quickly, and then we're actually going to use this to kind of segue into our topic of conversation today, because these things marry so beautifully. So, and that should be fantastic. So Lindsay just wanting to know, what about a static podcast content, like a series about a thing? And that's all, like a mini series or something like that.
And a lot of people do that, right? That's huge in true crime, right? That's good in a lot of people reading their own books, those sorts of things. I call those more audio shows than I do podcasts, right? Because they are mini series, they are encapsulated. There's no problem in any of that, right? I go searching podcasts all the time and I'll find some that are 3, 5, 8 episodes and done. But that might be enough. It's kind of like binging a Netflix show, right? So having the one season or the static podcast, not a problem whatsoever. But if you're just sitting back thinking, I should probably do that someday, it's never going to get done. Get it. Put it out there. Talk about whatever you want to talk about. And maybe you make chapters. Maybe it becomes, Lindsay McDougall loves going into true crime or weird wallpaper or whatever it is that she's into, that you're into, Lindsay. But you create these mini series. Now people are thinking about you as the mini series creator, right? You've got all these different topics you can talk about. I'm a big fan. I don't care how anyone does this. There's no one right way, but I'm just trying to dive into it and get as many folks doing it as possible. That's my thoughts on it.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Yes, I love that. So taking that thought, and then you could have said it live. So taking that and then just expanding it into our conversation today. one of the things that we've been talking about recently is just this relationship between artist and work and consumer or viewer or, customer, how that relationship works and how we as the artist should be thinking about the way that we relate to our customers, our viewers, our fans, however you want to classify them, and how then that influences the kind of work we make. Like, how do we think of that relationship? How do we cultivate that relationship? How does it influence the kind of art we make? Because if you have ever wondered to yourself, I really want to make this, but I don't know if it will sell. And if you've ever thought to yourself, people really are into this right now, I'd love to jump on that bandwagon, but would I be a complete sellout if I made something that fit along with, these lines? If you've ever read somebody's post and we're like, oh man, everybody's buying their stuff now because of this one post. How come I don't seem to be able to say anything like that or to get that kind of response? Like, if you have ever thought any of these things at all, then you are kind of in the same line of thought that we have been in over the past month or so. And Becca has been like focusing on this a lot just in some of your reading and stuff. So I would love to hear, Becca, like, what brought this train of thought on, and then let's just open up and kind of bat these ideas around a little bit, because as artists cultivating communities and followings and readerships and whatever it is that we're trying to build, this really matters. Like having a, I don't want to say a plan, but at least a philosophy for this or an interest in this can really change the way that we approach how we relate to the kind of people we're talking to try to get them to buy our art.
Yeah. So I can't say that my particular interest had like something brought it on per se. I've just kind of been finding these similarities in like different kinds of media. I've been indulging in books, podcasts, random blogs, whatever. So initially I posted on Facebook status, and I shared this in the Artist Forge group too. And it said, how did I word this? When's the last time you performed an experiment with your art? And this might be unintentional, but a time when you tried something new and adapted your approach, embracing or rejecting that new thing based on observations you made of your audience, thinking of it as more approaching from a scientific experiment perspective. And I was recently introduced, Nicole, you know this, to this professor named Angus Fletcher, and he teaches story science, which I found really, really interesting. And it was exciting to hear like an academic get really excited about literature and storytelling and like how that relates to things like machine learning or to neuroscience. And I love that there's, people pursuing this from an academic angle instead of this kind of harsh line we often see where people are only interested in just the science or just the art or just, the computer.
It's only fiction.
It's fiction, but his work's really interesting. Anyway, he, in a podcast I was listening to where he was a speaker, he brought up this idea that all storytelling, from the perspective of literature, all literature is a scientific experiment performed by the author. And then the data they receive back is from the audience, and they can't escape that relationship between themselves and what is the term I want? But anyway, the kind of like they're variables, they're control groups, so they're not control groups or whatever, that are the audience that's receiving their writing. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And thinking about it from the visual art perspective, like, yeah, even if I make art that's personal and I think it's kind of about me, it's always going to rely on that relationship with an audience, unless it just like lives in my house in a dark closet. And Lindsay actually had some interesting thoughts on this too, if she's still here with us. So I've been kind of following that thread, like, what does that relationship mean? And on the particular status on my Facebook, almost everyone kind of pushed against the idea of the audience influencing the things they make. And I don't want to say it's completely disingenuous, but I was just fascinated by this. And I kind of was probing and pushing, like, are you sure? Like, why are you putting it on your Instagram? Why are you putting it on your Facebook? Or, why are you trying to get into a gallery if you don't care what people might say or do or feel when interacting with your art? And I know we talked about something similar maybe a year or two ago. We broached this topic of, what do you as artists look for when you're the audience? What kind of art do you connect with? And I feel like we're it's worth considering those relationships and the communicative nature of any kind of art, even when it is really, really personal and comes from this place within yourself. The communicative nature of having an audience at all, I think, really is important for us to consider. So that's kind of where the brain cells,
where the brain has been.
Yeah.
I want to really quickly to throw out there, just to challenge everybody. If you're in the audience today and you're thinking to yourself, no, my art is just mine. It is the outpouring of my soul and whatever I feel moved to make. I just want to remind you that all of the most famous early art was commissioned by a person to the artist. Like almost all of this stuff that we like love so desperately that we look when we look at like classical art, there was almost always a patron who was like, you know what I want? I want a baby on the ceiling and these growing flowers. And then the artist was like, fucking fine, I'll do that, but I'm going to make it way better than your stupid baby idea, right? Or we need a statue of Lucifer to go in this church. And they, you know, made it. If you've never heard of the hot Lucifer statue, I urge you to Google this. It's a really funny story, being a beautiful statue. But most of these things, these were portraits of people. These were commissions by the church. These were commissions from patrons. It's not until relatively recently that we tend to think of artists as these individual geniuses who buck all of society and go off on their grand artistic tortured adventures to spew the, you know, birth of their souls out into the world in some kind of artistic thing. Like, this is a narrative in and of itself that is still relatively recent to human history. For a long time, artists were literally like hired people that you paid them to come do things for you because you couldn't do them for yourself. And it's not as if they still weren't kind of revered for having these incredible skills, but they weren't these tortured genius souls who could only, you know, they were going to be on the street if a patron didn't pay them to come make stuff. Because most of them could not make a living off of painting a portrait for somebody. They were, just like we all are, slaves to the system that pays the money. So I just want to challenge everybody in the way that you think to be really careful of making this assumption that the only way your art can be real or authentic or artistic is if you are the single and sole arbiter of everything about it. Most art has been tied to commercialism for a really, really long time, purely because it has to be. And that doesn't stop us from still making incredible, unique visions of artistic genius. So I'm just going to throw that out there before we.
I mean, if we step away from the commercial realm of art, even, I mean, there's still kind of this interactivity in anything remotely artistic, right? Like if you think, I don't know, your mom's embroidering little flowers on the skirt she sewed for you, right? You know, when you're 5 years old, living on the farm and who knows where, middle of nowhere, Little House on the Prairie area. I don't know, right? There's this communicative, relational aspect between your mother knowing that you liked a certain kind of flower and the work that she's putting into it and what that embroidery is going to communicate when you go to the market and, you know, once a month or whatever, and what that's going to tell other people who don't know you and might not interact with you at all about you and your family life. So even if it isn't from that commercial working artist meeting a patron perspective, there's still this interactivity to anything, from the way we dress or the way we style our clothes to cave paintings on a wall. Like, it requires human interaction to have meaning. You're muted, Matt.
If you're talking, Matt, you're muted.
I caught myself right as I said it, and I looked down and I saw the red button, and I was like, I always do this. So I agree completely. I think, you know, art helps communicate the misunderstood, right? It helps communicate the parts of ourselves that other people don't know. We're able to evoke emotion. We're able to make a contribution to society. We're able to build tribe. But at the core of all of that is that little voice. I want somebody to pay attention to me, right? And I truly believe this. So going back to the cave paintings, I want somebody to understand that the things with the sharp horns are bad, right? And it killed the guy that we didn't know his name, but killed him last week in that other cave. Communication, right? Emotion. All of these things. That's what we're trying to do. And we can't fool ourselves to think that we don't want people to pay attention to that. I agree with Becca. Take the commercial aspect out of it. There has to be the relationship between the audience and the artist. That is what helps define what art is in whatever way you define it, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. If, picking lint out of our toenails helped communication, you'd see a lot more of that being done publicly, right? But we don't. So that's the way that I look at all of this, is that there has to be that relationship. It's intrinsic to the creation process, right? Now, I don't know if I'm even close to answering the question or adding any cogent points of intellectualism here. But the point is, I really believe that we think of ourselves way too much and forget about the why we're doing what we're doing, right? My photography might be better than some, sucks comparatively, but we're all trying to communicate the same way, right? We're trying to say something, whether that's for us or whether it's for society. We're trying to say something. And what we do in order to get that point across is what we consider to be our art. That makes sense?
So Lindsay actually on my status had suggested something similar, that something does not fully, and Lindsay, please correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm too lazy to find the comment, that something becomes art when it gains an audience. And I thought that was particularly interesting. I feel like that lends itself to what you're just saying, Matt, where it's relying upon that. So, I mean, question for y'all and whoever's watching, if you did not have an audience, would you be doing what you're doing?
Nope.
Yeah, there wouldn't be much point in writing fictional stories of hundreds of thousands of words if somebody wasn't going to read them. But also, I 100% agree with Lindsay. I think art, I've become convinced lately that art is far more ephemeral even than I first believed that it is, because I now don't necessarily consider a piece of art to be a thing in and of itself. I think art happens at the moment of interpretation. So when you see a thing, for a lot of the folk art that we have now, I think the people who made it wanted to be able to see beautiful things in their life, very functional things. Sometimes a piece of pottery that was probably just going to hold water or something else simple. And we see those things now and we're like, this is a beautiful piece of art. This is folk art. This is culture. This is, we are looking at this piece that may literally have been something incredibly simple. And we are attributing to it all of this additional meaning based on the context of what we understand. And when we see that, then that interpretation is the thing that's real, not merely the piece in and of itself, because that piece, similar pieces were probably like 50 pieces may have been thrown that day. Half of the pieces were broken. Somebody puts them in a pawn shop. Somebody, those were not art. Those were functional pieces of whatever. And then once the context is added and the interpretation starts, all of a sudden, the thing is art. The urinal is art because we were asked to think about it in a different way. And it's the thought itself and our experience with interpreting the thing, I think, that all of a sudden, like, that feels more like the art and not necessarily just the thing itself, the piece. The piece is like the facilitator, just like the words I'm speaking are vibrations in the air. It's what's going on inside your head that matters, not the fact that the air is vibrating.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, we don't smell anything either, right? We taste it. Don't make me to go down that road. But I think it's true. I think that it's our interpretation of it, right? My interpretation of the sounds coming out of your head, right, make me think different things. I may agree with you about how those words are interpreted. I may not agree with you, but that is the lens through which I see my world. And I think, and we may have had this conversation a long time ago. There's so many voices in my head. I don't know. But I think if we had, I think we had defined at one point saying once enough people agree on the concept of a thing, like if we all agree that that's art, then we're establishing the precedent by which other things that resemble that should or should not be weighed as art, right? So
we're creating context, right?
We're creating context, right?
Yeah.
So we have to remember that over time, whether it was through patrons or not, we've just been creating larger and larger sets of contexts so that we can better judge what is created, right? Therefore, it gives a lot of artists latitude to say, well, there is this one thing, this one time, this one guy did, well, I'm doing that same thing, and that's art. Well, that could also be considered sculpture or painting or illustration, right? Pick your word. How are you looking at the world? So I look at all of this and I say, it's so subjective. It's really hard to classify, but we try to wrap containers around things so that we can better understand it. So yes, it happens at the moment of interpretation. It's based on our own experiences, our wants, our needs, our fears, our desires, right? And all we can do is best interpret that to whether or not we consider it personally art or not. I've wandered a little bit off of Becca's original point, I think, but I'm just going to keep talking because no one's stopping me.
No, I like that. I like that. And I think that plays into why we talked about visual literacy so much, because when we can find those markers that most of us agree on, that makes it a lot easier for the artist to go, okay, most people see these things this way. Therefore, in order to communicate in the way that I intend, I can take advantage of this kind of corporate understanding of a thing in order to say, or to try to say such and such.
Do you think in that vein, do you think that we, as monkeys with computers, do you think that we are capable of coming up with new, whatever we would consider art? Can we come up with new stuff, or is it all derivative of something else? Is anything visual derivative of a cave painting, which is derivative of a cloud that someone that saw looks like a turtle? Like, is everything derivative?
I mean,
I think I blew a
are
fuse.
are we saying everything derivative? Are we using derivative in the same way we would use influence?
Are we reaching
Like-
Platonism? Is that what's happening?
I'm sorry.
It's
Platonic
coming from the realm of ideas where everything actually exists.
Anyway, I'm going to ease back a bit.
Well, okay. So, are you familiar with like Plato? And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Plato's theory of forms and like the distaste for art.
My favorite
I know
thing
Nicole
ever.
is, but just okay. So like in like this Platonic philosophy, right, where that art is like the most insulting version of a thing. It is an imitation of the thing, which is the imitation of its reality in the aether, the whatever it is. I mean, which if you kind of buy into that particular philosophical wavelength,
Framework.
I mean, yeah, everything is a derivative. Everything is a mimicry of something else. And I mean, that's kind of also then this basis of, if we want to go back to the AI conversation, of how that kind of like mimesis works, right? Where everything is derivative of something else that is based purely on the past. However, I have seen it suggested by some people that what really defines the human element, coming back to the human artist, is our ability to be forward thinking and look at future possibilities, not necessarily structured entirely on things that have already happened. So while they may be derived or, adjacent to current art or technology or whatever, I mean, our ability to innovate is to be thinking forward. And so, well, maybe it's not new the way you're just defining it, Matt. I mean, there's still there's something there. There's something that's given us the capacity to evolve as a species so quickly and so in such a widespread way.
So you're making me think there, Becca, and I'm wondering if, so the forward thinking part, I mean, so that also kind of comes back to the ability to interpret, because forward thinking essentially just is future interpretation, right? It's the ability to like draw conclusions based on current evidence of what may potentially happen in the future. But then there's also that kind of chaotic element of how we be creative in the way that we're combining disparate things in order to come up with a new thing. So, you know, if I say, yeah, a cloud frog is a new thing, granted, there are clouds and there are frogs, but there are no cloud frogs until I made said cloud frog. And now that it may be, you know, slightly derivative in the same way that a child is a derivative of pieces of their parent, but it isn't one or the other thing. And then in the future, you know, like based on the way that I can predict future outcomes, who knows what cloud frogs may become. And in 50 years, maybe everybody will have a cloud frog pet, and I can plan for that. But still, maybe it's the chaotic nature of our brain's ability to put 2 ideas or 3 or 5 ideas together that really makes it human per se. Because with AI and like machine learning algorithms, it can make new things, but it does it according to a very prescriptive process of combining things together, right? The weird shit that humans can do, I think that chaos maybe has like, because I have the chaos of whatever weird way my brain works, and then you have the chaos of your interpretation. And there's no way to predict what that's going to be. And maybe it's the combination of both of those things happening together in that moment, that eureka moment of interpretation from you. So my weird shit happens, you get it, you interpret it. And in that moment, that's when art actually becomes art, like purely for the purpose of.
I'm having a weird thought.
Say the weird.
So, okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to pose this into a question that goes somewhere instead of just asking the universe for answers and screaming into the void. Okay, so I feel like there's kind of like there's this element of conflict, right? Then there's sort of this conflict between artist and audience in a sort of abstract way. And I'm thinking about storytelling in general, like when we want to go and tell our stories, or Nicole, like when you go and you write a book, even like a fictional book, right? The conflict is key to making it interesting to the audience. And I'm developing this as we go, so bear with me.
Nope, keep saying it. I'm following you.
Okay. So how then, I mean, for visual artists, how are we exploring, you know, that conflict that makes things interesting to people through visual arts, through photography, through illustration, etc.? You know, what are we creating under that general kind of definition of conflict that then is engaging for other people, that creates that, you know, that desire to interact, to be thoughtful, to be, you know, chaotic in your own right? How does that translate from a visual? I feel okay. That was all over the place.
No, I just want to ask you a question really quick. Is conflict a necessary piece of that? Because I feel like.
Okay, so that's a good question. That's yeah. I think that's maybe more of a solid question there. You know, is it necessary to create something interesting and human? Does it require?
Is conflict necessary for that?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of like, I think art is an invitation to a conversation. And a conversation doesn't always necessarily have to have a point of conflict. I think that invitation in and of itself, as long as the invitation is compelling enough, right? Like if I were to say, come have an in-depth conversation with me about cloud frogs, you would be like, what the fuck is a cloud frog? That is interesting enough to maybe at least get me to partake in the conversation long enough to either find out what a cloud frog is or that I don't care about them. There doesn't necessarily have to be like here's why you need to listen to me, because cloud frogs are going to invade your home and steal your shoes, right? Like that kind of conflict doesn't have to exist. I guess it depends on how we're defining conflict. And even if just discovering the answer to a question could be considered a conflict, in storytelling, it usually is the idea that there is a thing that should happen and something stopping the thing from happening. And then the thing stopping it is what the conflict rotates around. But I'm thinking of some Studio Ghibli films where there is not necessarily a particular conflict that needs to be solved. There's just a story of people living as a thing is happening. Like I'm thinking of My Friend Totoro.
Hmm. But I mean, so in Totoro, right? You have, I mean, there are these emotional senses of conflict that invite the viewer, you know, to be emotionally invested, right? The mom is sick, you know, the kids have moved somewhere new, they're getting to know a new place and new people, and it's difficult.
But is that conflict or is that just life, right? Like usually from a storytelling perspective, at least as a fictional storyteller, if I was going to take that story and say, okay, where's the conflict in that story? The mom is sick. Okay, how does that conflict like cause everybody to behave? Most of the time, traditionally, the goal would be to fix that. If that's the conflict, then the end of it needs to be the conflict is solved. Often in those kinds of stories, the conflict either we learn to live with the difficulty or we gain a sense of peace from understanding we can't change the outcome, right? Like those are kind of non-traditional ways to handle what could be considered that conflict, because it doesn't, in that case, it doesn't necessarily become a conflict as in a thing that can be solved. It's more of a forcing function or just a piece of life. Yeah, so I don't know. Now I'm really interested in like the idea of conflict and if that's like a necessary ingredient,
Yeah.
depending on how we think of it.
I mean, that was kind of my brain vomit there, was just like, you know, how does that apply, right? Because with your Cloud Frogs, and you invite me to have this discussion as audience of your Cloud Frogs, and maybe, you know, maybe the conflict is the fact that I've never seen a Cloud Frog before. Like, how am I supposed to comprehend this? Like, I don't like these. They're too fluffy. They're too cute, and I don't want Cloud Frogs in my life. Which is not true, but
if there are Cloud Frogs, we want them, please.
To have the conversation or to view the art, I do wonder if that is some kind of abstract definition of conflict in a way. But and then, you know, then yes, is it necessary at all? And is it something that's going to drive viewership and interest in your art? Is it going to make your audience more engaged with the art?
I'm going to say for me, I'm not going to define conflict that way because it then becomes too broad. So I think for me, I'm going to keep conflict as something between two opposing forces. So, and I think I have to do that because I need, at least for me, I need defined words to be precise enough that using them actually means something. And if I just use conflict as a broad term for something that, you know, causes discomfort, then that's just too much. Something that is intriguing, sometimes something that is novel, something that is nostalgic, something that is relatable. And those may be kind of the relatability or the ability to find echoes of something within yourself, mm-hmm. I think can also exist without the ability for conflict that still might make a piece of art compelling enough to engage with.
Mm-hmm. Matt, are you short-circuiting?
No, I'm listening. I think I always go into kind of the woo-woo land, right? And I'm way up on I'm up here in terms of vibration, and conflict for me is just lack of communication, right? Lack of being able to see through someone else's lens, right? So if conflict in this particular case, this art case, if there's conflict on interpretation, it just means there was a lack of communication somewhere on the artist's part to be able to convey that information appropriately and have it received the way they want. Now, that may never happen. It may never get understood by the other person because they have no capacity of looking at the world through the same lens. People are just vibrating at different frequencies, man. So I think when we're talking about conflict, conflict in art, I always come back to it's a lack of education or a lack of communication on the artist's part to really convey what they're trying to say. Now, some people hide behind the pack. I don't give a fuck how they interpret my art. And that's perfectly fine. But I think you're selling yourself short right? If you are in it to be controversial, then all you're doing is communicating in a certain way. If you're doing it and it's being misinterpreted, you're communicating in a certain way. And for me, I don't believe in conflict. I just believe in lack of understanding between two parties, right? The voices in my head are in conflict all the time. And it's just a lack of understanding of myself, quite frankly. So when I think about all this and I extrapolate it out, I don't really think about the conflict. I think about, why am I producing something? What am I trying to get out of the production? Is it exercising my own demons? Is it to communicate something? Is it to warn somebody? Is it for ego purposes and I want everybody to love me, right? I don't know. But I know for me, my photography is a source of income first, a way to communicate and connect with people second, right? If I didn't have the income, I'd still be communicating and connecting with people, but in a different way. I might be serving them fries. I think when it comes down to what we do, why we do it, why we're producing the art, what our intentions are, that is singular. But I think the overarching part of it all is that we're trying to communicate parts of ourselves. There is no way that there is going to be universal acceptance of anything. But the broader that we can reach and have it be accepted and understood, I'm wondering if those are the people that we hold up as the celebrities, as the great artists, right? They were just better at communicating this stuff. I don't know. What's your thought there? Or did I completely misinterpret? I may have blown a circuit.
No, but that's exactly what's interesting is that the back and forth, right? And what do you think about the presentation of the conflict through the art, though? If it's not the discussion between artist and audience that needs to require conflict, do you feel that depicting conflict through the art drives greater conversation with the audience?
I think when there is something that is predominantly conflicted based, piss Christ, right? Or something like that, where you're going to have people look at it and societal norm, cultural norm is going to make them go, that makes me uncomfortable, right? They're uncomfortable or they're upset or they're happy because people are pissed off, like whatever it is, however you're interpreting it is just you, whether you understand or don't understand what the artist was saying. The artist is making something conflicting for conflicting's sake. I'm not using my words correctly, but you get what I'm saying. If they're doing it just to be controversial, all they're doing is teaching people, they're communicating, they're educating people how to see different points of view. That's all they're doing, right? They feel like there's a gap in understanding in this particular area. So I'm going to produce something that is going to force people to talk about that. Did I just
Now it's Nicole's turn to
do something? Yeah, I'm not going to say anything else for fear of fucking up. So
No. I was just listening to you. I was listening to your thoughts and I was thinking about what Becca meant when she was explaining it. And I was trying to think of like different pieces of art in my head and trying to pick out, can I find conflict in this? Like when I'm looking at this piece, do I see conflict in the narrative of whatever this image is? And I was thinking particularly of a couple of things. I was thinking of a piece of Kate Woodman's, where there is a nude woman on the ground and we could assume it was her husband, but there is a man in a suit who is either leaving or locking the door. You cannot tell what he's doing. The conflict in that then is the fact that we don't have an answer to that question, right? It's left ambiguous. And so we're left in interpretation phase for quite a long time because there's nothing within the frame that would let us actually close that story. We can't close that story and go, oh, there it is. Okay, now I'm done. You have to continue to look at and try to interpret, right? So that encourages long-term investment in the piece because there's no neat period at the end of that sentence. But then I was thinking of, and I just completely lost the name, and I maybe I should have started with this. What's his name? The people sitting in the street corner deli, New York City.
It was there and now it's gone. Yes.
It's gone. Son of a monkey. Okay. there also is no inherent conflict in that piece. Somebody may be able to skip right by that because it literally is almost a snapshot of empty streets and a corner deli and some people inside there. But the more you look and the more you ask questions and the more you try to interpret what may be happening there, the more room there is for a story to grow. So when you were talking about that, Matt, all of a sudden it just confirmed to me that the art is in the interpretation. Because like, if you just give me Nighthawks by Edward Hooper. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Becca. Look that one up, friends. If you just give me a clean and simple story, I can enjoy it and I can go, oh, me too. I love that. But if I don't have any room to bring my experience into it and to interpret what may be happening in a way that's relevant to me, that's not much different than looking at a pretty flower. Pretty flower is still pretty. I still enjoy flower. I still want flower to be around. Is this art? Right? Like, this is nice and it brings some color to my room and it relieves some of the monotony of the thing, but it doesn't ask me to engage. It doesn't ask me to interpret. It doesn't ask me to, et cetera, et cetera. It's still pretty, still has value. Where's the conversation then between me and the artist in the piece? This three-way integral conversation that allows something to gain more substance and meaning than just pretty. Lindsay says, struggle / conflict / suffering is part of the human experience. There's no escaping it. I think as humans, we're drawn to things that we can relate to for comfort, hope, camaraderie. Art should comfort the conflicted and afflict the comfortable, which is I've always really loved that quote. Which, I mean, kind of is what I was talking about before, is that ability to relate to a thing. Norman Rockwell, there may be a piece that doesn't necessarily have any particular conflict. It's a snapshot of a moment in the story of a day. How did this kid end up in the dairy where they're getting an ice cream from this really kooky looking guy who works behind the counter? There's nostalgia for something that seems like a simpler, more wholesome, more et cetera time. It doesn't have to have a lot of conflict in order to be enjoyable, right? But it does hint that there's a greater story beyond this snapshot of a moment in time. I'm rambling at this point. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. That nostalgia aspect is interesting. Two things. One, so that interpretation, that creation of story within our own head, that kind of goes back to where we started with the conflict bit about what is the difference between machine creativity versus human creativity. And we're projecting our own versions of stories when we interpret a piece of art, whatever kind of art that is. And then related to that, so that idea of, is conflict necessary to compelling story? I mean, that conflict in the idea of looking at like a Norman Rockwell painting and like feeling that nostalgia for something that doesn't exist anymore, perhaps. And
conflict is that it doesn't exist.
Well, no. Just that the conflict is internal, right? It isn't necessarily.
Yes.
Yeah. Like that there's still a conflict. It's just not created by the artist explicitly. It's created through the relationship.
Right. The conflict is not inherent in the art. It's in my interpretation of it based on all of my junk, which is why I was saying that, like, the idea of art feeling so ephemeral, right? Because with the pieces, like the classical pieces that we look at now, we have the job of reinterpreting them so that they still make sense to us now. We've lost a significant amount of the meaning that those would have had during their time period because we don't live in those cultures. We don't know the people who would have been painted and how what everybody else knew about their life influenced the way that certain things were done. And we've talked about that before, right? Looking at some of these pieces and then learning, hey, during that time, these parts of the body weren't shown. That's how we know that this is a prostitute, et cetera, et cetera. Like this meaning that didn't exist before that changes what that is, and how it's sometimes the conflict we bring to the interpretation that makes the thing interesting in the first place, and not necessarily anything inherent about the art, but our renegotiation of the interpretation of what these things mean based on now and what we can bring to it. And I think the experiment that we did with initial really abstract AI art when we did that. And we were bringing interpretation to these pieces that were only basically curated by us, right? Like we didn't create them or paint them. We just kind of curated it with changing a few levers. But the resulting piece, we were still able to find meaning in those pieces because we carry the meaning around with us. And so the art doesn't exist, I think, without. Yeah, I agree. It can't. I don't think it can. Even if audience is only me, because the piece, once it exists on its own. It's not like a continual outpouring of me. It's like a snapshot that happened of my mind at one point in history. So I can look back at that stuff and it lives its own life through my continued interpretation of it. Even so, even if I am only audience, art is still art. As long as it begs interpretation, right? As long as I continue to interpret it.
I like that. As long as it begs interpretation.
Have you ever seen a piece that was so blatant that even if it was well done, you were like, that's nice, and then you just kept going?
Yes.
You know?
It's called
Yeah.
Instagram.
But I mean, like, okay, so we've talked about this before. We've talked about the fact that sometimes that we've seen pieces that don't seem to have any life. Like it's technically perfect and the pose is beautiful and all of these things are happening, and there shouldn't be a reason for the art to not be as interesting as it is, or not be as uninteresting as it is when you consider like the technical prowess of the photographer. And yet it's so easy to just be like, cool. And that this same reason that so often those pieces where we don't see their face, like for a long time there's a thing on book covers where it was woman running away, like woman in a dress running away into a field or into a castle or into something. And the whole reason that those worked as commercial pieces is because the viewer could then insert themselves into the place of that character. That could be me, right? Running away into the thing, having a magical adventure. The pieces that require nothing of us are boring. Like they can still be pretty, like flower, you know, more like cool. I liked it.
I think all the stuff that we see as pretty or negligible, for example, are just things that we've already cataloged in our brain at some point in our life. We've already done the thinking about it. We've already seen something like it. We've cataloged it as something that had an impact or did not. So when we're seeing something later on and we're seeing the art and we go, meh, it's because there is no precedent in our life to have given us a strong opinion one way or another what that means to us. Is it danger or is it pleasure? Right? And this is where the caveman part of us, the primal part of us comes out. And this is how we're doing our interpretation. What is the lens through which we've seen the world? And if our experience as a human has given us a wide variety of things to experience, you find that your visual literacy is stronger, right? If we are isolated for our entire life and don't have experiences, everything we see is going to cause an emotion if we're an adult when it happens, right? So I think that interpretation, if something is negligible or the art is meh, then we just have already seen all of the things that we need to know, and we don't need to spend the mental cycles interpreting that. And we just pass by it. We filter it out.
So you think that maybe that's why novelty is such a strong motivator?
We
when
haven't
it comes
seen
to
this
art.
before. That's what innovation is. Oh shit, no one's experienced this before. Right?
Cloud frog is a whole new thing.
The cloud frog is amazing. Now, I had cloud turtles originally, but you know, you want to be derivative of the cloud turtle, that's fine. You just go with a different reptile. That's fine. The point is
it's an amphibian, Matt.
It's amphibian.
Right.
I think it really is that. Have we seen it before or not? Have we connected with something similar that our brains can process and say, not a threat, doesn't bring us pleasure, doesn't cause us pain. Move
The
on.
nostalgia button would then be the opposite of the the novelty button, right? So
Yeah.
like we have the novelty button where it's interesting because it's new, and we have the nostalgia button because it's interesting because it's comforting and it's relatable and it harkens back to things that we loved and enjoyed, and so it gives us that sense of peace or reverie or whatever.
But you may have been introduced to Norman Rockwell as a kid as something that was like, oh, look how kind this is. Someone may see the mailman with the kid in the ice cream as this predator is trying to lure Johnny home, right? What lens are you interpreting the world through, right? If someone's never seen Nighthawks,
Yeah.
what are they going to think? Cool people, lonely people, right? So I just think when we're looking at things, especially since we're conditioned by these fucking things to just kind of scroll until something captures our attention, gives us that dopamine hit, right? Then the more we do that, the less impactful really anything is, because we're just bombarding our brains with stuff to see. So it becomes harder and harder for things to become novel.
You know, that I think that also kind of plays into conversations we've had before about the fact that, so this kind of takes the parts of this conversation we haven't gotten to have yet, but this kind of takes that idea of creating for an audience like all the way into the full side of the spectrum, where everybody is creating the thing that we know has gotten people likes, and we're doing it over and over again until it ceases to become valuable or interesting. So there's only so much time, or so many times, that, you know, Bowser can become a girl or a Disney princess can become a real person before it stops being interesting anymore. And that aspect of novelty is gone, and it doesn't have enough of the other things. Like, it doesn't have any conflict. It doesn't have any nostalgia anymore. You know, it's been done. So I guess that maybe just is a good reminder that if you are relying on a single aspect of communication to carry the piece, at some point that piece will fall apart because there isn't enough of the other aspects of communication. And like, so when we were talking at the beginning about podcasting, right? The sound of another human voice is a really powerful thing. Then when you add text, then when you add sound effects, then when you add seeing somebody's face, like, which is why video is one of the biggest things in the world, because we don't only have one aspect of communication. Now we can see body language as well as hear intonation and etc. So if a piece of art leaves out, like if it is relying on a single pillar to keep it standing, probably not going to be a very impactful piece in the long term, right? Like,
when Marty McFly played rock and roll at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, right? It was ahead of everybody's
the fact
time.
that you remember Enchantment Under the Sea makes me so happy.
He was playing Chuck Berry before people were ready for rock and roll, right? But he said, but your kids are going to dig it, right? That's kind of where we are with a lot of art, right? People just have to have it incorporated into the cultural norm for everybody to consider. Is it innovative? Is it not? Right? We have to have some shared experience that allows us to say this is innovative or it's not. Right? So the fact is, he just did something innovative that people weren't ready for yet. Enough people hadn't heard it and seen it to make a decision whether they liked it or not. Long analogy for an old movie. But I think we're forgetting that cultural aspect of the tribe. How many people think this is a good thing? How many people think this is a bad thing? Is the new thing that you've created along or can be associated with one of those sides, right? Is it, and that conflict that it creates, is that just can be communicated differently, right? And like Lindsay was saying, you can communicate with art or not. For me, I think there are so many variables into how we interpret things that we just go back to the fact that art exists. This is a known entity that we can interpret things differently. Therefore, we call it art. If we're trying to communicate or evoke emotion, we can go through that channel to do that with people instead of having a conversation, instead of writing, right? We can produce art whether the art is writing or speech, but we're producing something to gain a reaction or communicate a point, right? So I think as we start to think about, where does innovation lie? Where does conflict lie? Can you produce the thing for production's sake? Does it need a point? I think all of that is fine to think about, but in order for us to interpret art, we've got to look at it through a lens. We've got to be subjective. We have to look at it through our experience in order to try to understand it or understand that we don't understand it. Is any of this making sense? Right?
Mhm.
So, and I haven't even done any mushrooms. So as I think about this, when it gets back to me, right? Because it's all about me. Why do I create the things that I create? I like affirmation. I like helping people learn about new stuff. I like conflict. I like being able to teach people and move us all a little bit forward. I like to do that through I'm going to call it art, writing, music, video, drawings, whatever it might be. I like to communicate that way. It's my way of doing it. Is that acceptable to a lot of people? Meh. Is it socially acceptable? Yeah. But it's just how I choose to do it. Someone might do it through welding or fixing cars or sitting in traffic. How do you guys interpret that? Was anything that I said understood? Because I see Becca's eyes go like this, and Nicole, you're with your kiddo. Bassam just said, "Fuck this, I'm out." So
I was still listening. I was just getting lovins,
So I was trying to cover while you were getting your lovins. All I'm trying to say is I think it's so broad. We can talk in circles, and I can talk in aphorisms for days. So I think it's a matter of just understanding that I love the fact that we can continue to have this conversation, continue to broaden it, continue to have interpretation, continue to communicate about what we believe and what we don't believe. But whatever art we're using is just the avatar through which we are having that conversation. Does that make sense? That sculpture, that painting, or that AI generator, doesn't matter. We're having the conversation around it. We're getting to know each other a little bit better. I think therein lies a lot of the purpose. How people interpret that action of understanding each other creates the world of art, right? Because we all do it a little bit differently. I'm trying to land the plane, but I got no stick control and the rudder blew off about 20 minutes ago.
Landing doesn't have to be pretty to be effective.
Oh God, no.
I can see that you're having a thought down there, Becca, so I want to give you a chance to talk about that before
I mean, do we want to spend another hour talking about the dystopian horror that is novelty in 2023? Those
There
are my
are
thoughts
many,
right
many
now.
cursed images that are also novel.
Cursed images. Well, okay, so Matt brought up like the idea that things, even when they are novel, they need the time. They need to be allowed the time then to become the norm, is kind of what you were poking at a little bit, Matt.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be so novel that we hate it purely because it's new, right? Like, it has to be novel in the right way.
We had hair metal, but it kind of played itself out after a while.
But like, here's the dystopian horror of it is that, I mean, we're up here on Facebook and YouTube. Like, when I'm sharing my art, people are seeing it on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and Reddit and wherever the hell, ArtStation. The things that we're interacting with, the things that we are audience to, I feel like we do not have as much control as we'd like to think we do in what media we're actually consuming. So if we as artists, right, we're putting out this thing, hoping that people are going to see it and, maybe it'll catch on or whatever. But if it isn't enticing enough to gain traction immediately on social media, if that's, where you're finding your audience, will it ever be given that time to become the norm?
I mean, I think that's the important part of finding our audience, right? Which kind of comes back to this conversation. Like, the head of this conversation is, if it's not communicating with anybody, then it's not really serving its purpose. And so the idea of finding the right people to see your work enough that they become the evangelists of your work and give other people the chance based on their personal recommendation, which is why book selling is so hard. But yeah, I mean, I think it does come back to that.
I'm only waggling my finger because the variable we forgot about in there was the temporal aspect of it, right? I can sit at home with a drawer of silverware, spoons and forks, and I can take a tack welder and make a peacock out of it, right? And so now I've got my fork peacock. We're moving on from cloud frogs. So I've got my fork peacock.
I'm here for fork peacocks.
So I'm here for my fork and peacock. And no one may ever see it. It may exist in my basement. However, I produce something from the space dust in the air. I produce something that at some point down the line, someone may find and they are going to have a conversation about it. They will at least experience that thing. So if you are bringing it into the world, if you are producing AirPods or paper or porn, doesn't matter. Whatever you're producing, whether it's consumed now or consumed 1,000 years from now when someone finds it in a time capsule, you are just communicating, right? So I think we're so focused on how is our art being interpreted now. I don't think Michelangelo was thinking about, well, fuck, sometime down the line, I've got these sketches for a helicopter and Instagram, right? He didn't care about where this stuff was going to go 500, 1,000 years from now. He was just doing his thing there because he loved doing what he did. I think that's why we do what we do. We just like producing the thing. However, there is no need for it to be understood, interpreted, agreed upon, a social norm now. That may happen 3 evolutions of humanity from now.
I disagree. I need people to tell me I did a good job today so I can have good feelings about myself and not fall into a pit of despair.
And if you don't get those good feelings, like, are you going to stop doing what you're doing potentially? And that's that kind of relationship with the audience that I know we want to reject as artists. Like, yes, of course, I'm going to keep writing my novel or taking my photos or drawing my pictures. But if people don't give them the reaction that you're hoping for, it's painful. It's emotionally painful because of that personal investment. So maybe we don't go on to invent the flying machine. You know, we don't go on to write the next great novel for someone to find on accident at the library in 20 years because of that relationship. And because of the stupid algorithms that choose what we see. But that's another hour.
I try to take the time element out of this, right? I really do. I try to be like, am I doing this to get approval now? Or am I doing this because this is the need for me to bring it to life, whether or not anybody ever sees it? And I think therein lies my own conflict because I need to bring things together now so I can pay for the mortgage.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an either or, right? Like, it's definitely a both. I mean,
if you can combine
there's no way I'm going to make something and hide it somewhere and be like, someday somebody's going to Michigan frog this thing and they're going to be like, genius, but she's dead. That's for her. Like, nope, I want money now. I want accolades now. I want praise. Give it to me so that I can have my dopamine and be a functional person.
So at this point, are you making art or are you making something for retail?
I am, yeah, both, 100%. That was the whole reason in the beginning why I said, you know, we like to have this nostalgic like idea of the artist as this individual who just is weird and they express their whatever. Most of us have goals for the things that we're making, and all of the people that we look up to, they wanted money too. Let's not try to act like this has not been a motivating. Yes, they wanted accolades. Some people wanted to be like the artist of history and they wanted everybody to remember their names. We have goals for this stuff. We want to see those things happen. If nobody tells me I did, I'm still going to maybe my husband's the only one who's going to be like, that's cool, babe. But I still want, like, nobody else really sees my potions table over there, but I like it. I'm the audience for it. I made it. And now I appreciate it for myself. I feel like I did a good job. We still need that. And we're social. Like, there's a reason we're social animals. And if art is just a form of communication, then we still need that back and forth in order to make it worthwhile to do that. Otherwise, we'll go looking for another thing that feels worthwhile. maybe we'll be creative in that thing, but I challenge anybody. Try to convince me otherwise. I will not believe you. Sorry. Hang on a second, baby. All right. So we've had all kinds of fun communications today. Was it art? You're going to have to tell us. Have your interpretation. Put it in the comments and we will agree that this was art. But I think that it's a really cool thing to think about, number one, but then also to consider for yourself, aside from, do you need to come to any kind of conclusion for yourself in terms of like why you do this and what you're trying to communicate and what is important about that process? The main thing that I want to think about for this conversation is, if art is going to be like, if art is a form of communication, how am I employing that for the audience who shows up to consume what I'm giving them? Because all of us have some kind of platform somewhere, whether that's at our local gallery, whether that is on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or wherever it is that people are seeing our work. Once they see it enough, they become part of our viewing audience, right? How are we communicating with those folks? And if art is communication, or if art is interpretation, like if art happens at that instant of interpretation and a word that I just lost. I hate my brain.
I like it. It's a good brain.
I'm glad one of us does. Anyways, if it happens then what are we doing to facilitate that, right? Like, what are we doing to make that more effective for us, for them? Something worth thinking about anyway. And this is a super interesting conversation. So if you had thoughts on this today and you didn't share them in the comments, you should have, but you can still, there is still a chance. You're okay. Would you pick that up off the ground, babe? There is still a chance to do that in Facebook land. So let's continue this conversation, because I want to, and I think it's really interesting, and I will engage with you. Engagement, that was the word I was looking for. If you go and write it in there, I'm interested to hear what you think, and if there's any practical lessons that might be able to be drawn from this conversation. Like, philosophically, it's super cool. As far as the philosophy of art, it's super cool, but what do we do with it, right? How is it practical? If you have any thoughts on that, put those in the comments. And now it is time. Any closing thoughts, guys, that you want to leave people with before we say goodbye after we are a half hour overtime today?
I'm pretty sure I said all the words I need to say. But hey, when you see the stuff about the podcast class, please sign up. So a few more words. I was mistaken. Becca?
You have nothing?
I like your words better. Please say them.
I like your words. Okay, so like Matt said, first of all, go hang out in Facebook. Let us know what you think. Any thoughts, any lessons we can take from this. Number two, remember, Matt is going to expound upon this and why communication is so important in his class on how to podcast. So go and let us know. Is there a time, day, month, etc. that works for you? We want to make sure to make this as accessible as possible. And of course, if you are part of our Facebook group, you will be getting a discount on the class during the first week of sales. So we will make sure to keep that super available for everybody. And after that, then the price is going to go up. So make sure that you're paying attention and let us know what you think. And is there anything that's really important for you in terms of learning how to podcast you want to ask Matt about? I'm sure you will be open to those conversations in the Facebook group, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm an open book on everything, whether it's video editing, whether it's podcasting,
Platonism,
Satanism, right? Communication about what
also.
art is, space dust, all the things. I think I'm going to target, and I'm going to put this out there, I'll make the command decision, June 1st. It's a nice round number. It's a Thursday night, so it stays with our thing. Yep. It gives people a chance to ask some questions, and I can craft the content specifically for them. But yeah, it's ready to go. I could give it tomorrow, but let's target June 1st. Nice round number. How's that?
Perfect. June 1st. All right. Keep your eyes open. We will put up the links and everything for sale on the website. So be looking for that. Go ask your questions. In the meantime, let Matt know what you're curious about and what you think would be the most helpful about for you and your art business. Until then, next week we will be back together on Monday at the same bat time, the same bat place. So come join us then. In the meantime, go make art, and we will see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.